Today we're going to show you how to change the blower wheel on your dryer, and it's a really easy job. All we're going to need is a 5/16 nut driver, a 1/4" nut driver, a pair of locking pliers, and a 7/8 socket with a short extension and a ratchet. Let me show you how we do it. Now before we begin this repair, since we will be working near some electrical circuits, we'll want to disconnect the power to the dryer. So simply pull the plug if it has a cord on it, and if it's a hardwired dryer, we'll need to locate the circuit breaker panel or the fuse panel and disconnect the power there. Now our next step will be to remove the front panel from the dryer. And on this model there are two 5/16 screws at the bottom of the front panel that secure it to the base. So we'll just remove those two screws. Now with the screws removed, we can tilt out on the bottom of that front panel and unhinge it from the top where it's held in place with two spring clips. And then pivot it enough sideways, we can access the wires to the door switch. We're simply going to remove those two wires. And there are two separate sized terminals, so they will be easy to reconnect them. And then we're going to set that front panel aside. Now next we're going to remove the front bulkhead assembly, and it's held in place with four 5/16 screws that secure it to the sides of the cabinet. Then we'll just lift up on that front bulkhead until we release the two tabs at the bottom, and then tilt out on the bottom and remove it from the dryer cabinet. Now next we'll want to remove the drum, and to make that a little easier, we will remove two screws that are in each front corner that secure the main top to the cabinet. Again, they are a 5/16 screw. Now with these screws removed for the top, that will allow us to gain a little extra room to pull that drum out. So we can just gently move it forward, lift it off the rear rollers, and then we can reach in till we find the belt around the idler pulley, release the tension on it, and slide the belt off, and unravel it from the motor pulley. And then we can pull that drum completely out. And we'll set that aside. We'll also remove the belt. And this will give us much easier access to replace the part. Now to do this repair, I find it easier if we actually remove the blower housing and motor from the dryer itself. This really held in place just with two 5/16 screws that secure the front of the blower housing to the base, and then there's a slotted tab at the back that will allow us to pull it completely out and remove it. Now before we do that, we're just going to slide that vent outlet off the back, and we'll remove two 5/16 screws into the base, and then we're just going to gently lift up on the front of that housing and pull it forward while wiggling it back and forth, and that will release the tab at the back. Now to gain a little extra length, we can remove these two wires from the thermostat on the front of the housing, and then just lift that whole assembly up and pivot it around. Now with the motor and blower assembly out where we can work on it, we're next going to remove these 1/4" screws that secure the front of the blower housing to the housing itself. And just lift that cover away. Now next we're going to turn the whole assembly around so that we can access the motor pulley at the back where we can clamp our locking pliers on it. So we're going to clamp right on that large portion of the pulley, not out on the very end, but in towards the motor. Now we can again just pivot that assembly around. So our next step will be to turn that pulley off counterclockwise, and we have those locking pliers to keep the shaft from turning. We suggest that you put some protective gloves on and then grasp both sides of that pulley and give it a sharp turn, and then just simply unthread it. Remove the old pulley and discard it. And then just remove the old blower wheel and discard it. Just inspect that shaft and make sure it's clean and free of any debris. And then we'll thread the new blower wheel onto that shaft, just turning it clockwise. Then we'll want to reposition those locking pliers at the back so that it doesn't interfere with the idler pulley. Now that will allow us to tighten that clockwise. And the replacement blower wheel does have a 7/8 hub in the center that we can simply use our socket and ratchet on, and that will allow us to tighten it securely. We can then release the locking pliers, and rotate the cover to the blower housing back into position, and we can replace those 1/4-inch screws. And just make sure that we have all of those screws started before we tighten them. That will ensure that we have proper alignment of that cover. And go around and tighten them all. And then now we can lift that assembly back into the dryer. We'll want to make sure that we line up this rear tab with the slot in the base frame. Once we have that fully inserted in there, we can line up the 2 screw hole positions on the front. Next, we'll replace the 2 5/16 screws that hold those tabs on the front to the actual base frame, and make sure those are tightened securely. And we can reconnect the 2 wires to the thermostat. One has a male terminal, one has a female terminal, so they can't be mixed up. And now we're ready to reinstall the drum and the belt. Now, when reinstalling the belt on this dryer, I want to give you a good idea of how that is routed around the idler pulley and the motor shaft, because it's difficult to see from a wide angle with the drum into place. So the belt is going to come down the right-hand side of that drum. It's going to lay across the top of that idler pulley, and it's going to tuck down underneath. And then come over and go around the motor pulley. And when it's tightened, it will look like that. Now, when reinstalling the drum, I suggest that you wrap the belt around it first, and then just take up the slack with your hand and hold it tight. And we're going to slide it up over top of the blower housing. And if need be, you can just lift that top just enough so that we can slide it in. And we're going to set the rear of that drum on top of the rear drum rollers. And then just let the belt hang loosely on the drum. And then we can reach in with one hand on the right-hand side of that blower housing and our left hand in through the middle. And then we can pull that belt across the top of the idler pulley, down underneath the idler pulley. And then by just pushing on that pulley to take some of the tension of the spring, wrap it around the motor. And then while putting some pressure on that idler arm that is attached to a spring, just to release the tension some, we can wrap that belt around the motor pulley and back out under the bottom of the pulley off to the left and around the drum. Now I suggest that we turn that drum counterclockwise a couple of turns just to make sure that the belt lines itself up properly. So hold the drum up against the rear bulkhead, and you should notice the blower wheel turning at the same time. And we can now put the front bulkhead on. Now when reinstalling that front bulkhead, there's a couple things we want to make sure of, and that is the inlet to this chamber has to line up inside of that felt gasket. So make sure that that's flared out just enough. We'll tuck that down roughly into position. Rotate it around until it's square with the front. And then we need to catch the bottom of the drum with those glides so that they're supported properly. And hook those tabs in, one on either side. And that should line those screw holes up. Again, we're just going to turn that drum counterclockwise, make sure it's not binding. Reach around that felt, make sure we haven't collapsed that anywhere. And then we can reinstall the screws. And tighten those all securely. We can then replace the screws that secure the top to the cabinet. And again, we'll tighten those securely. And once we have both of those secure, we can now put the front panel on. Remember to reconnect the harness to the door switch. And make sure that those connections are secure. Then we'll rotate that front panel around, line it up, and make sure that the two spring clips at the top engage the lip at the front of the main top. And then install the two 5/16 screws that secure the front panel at the bottom. We're now ready to reconnect the power, and our repair is complete.